Hi, my friends. Father Carey here, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one, an appreciation of the spiritual journey of Anne Frank and what that journey has to say to you and me in our own troubled day. This year is the 96th anniversary of the birth of Anne Frank. She was born on the 12th of June, 1929. The entire world knows the name Anne Frank, thanks to the diary that she wrote during the 2 years in which she and her family and a few other people hid in an attic in Amsterdam from the Nazi occupiers of Holland. She wrote almost every day in her journal, in her diary, during that period, recording everything that was going on in that very secluded atmosphere. The quarrels and the spats between people who are shut up with one another without ever the possibility of going outside, her interior yearnings and fears and hopes and joys, the minutiae of everyday life and the expansion of her own interiority. And we read as we progress through the diary the maturation of a child of 13 into a precocious, because she grew up very quickly under the circumstances, 15-year-old, who is a different person from the child who entered into the hiding place, the secret annex. In examining that odyssey, my friends, I think that we learn something about the human spirit, which can give us not only comfort, but inspire us in our own spiritual journeys. Anne Frank was German by birth, as was her entire family. But in 1933, Hitler is named chancellor in Germany in January, and just 3 months later, the Nazis win federal elections to control the government. And shortly thereafter, Hitler begins to do everything that Hitler said he was going to do. He begins to round up political enemies. He begins to violate civil liberties. He begins to persecute Jews. Otto Frank, who is Anne's father, sees the handwriting on the wall, and he takes his family, his wife Edith, and his 2 daughters, Margot and Anne, to Amsterdam. And he goes to Holland because Holland during World War I had remained neutral. And Otto Frank clearly hoped that the country would remain neutral again if another war were to come. Well, another war did come. The Nazis occupied Holland in May of 1940, and it was just 2 years later that Otto Frank decided that he and his family needed to hide because the Jews in Holland were being rounded up and deported right and left. And the Jews who remained were subject to horrendously discriminatory laws. At the very beginning of her diary, Anne Frank describes just how oppressive the atmosphere had become before she and her family went into seclusion. Listen to this. She says, "Our freedom was severely restricted by a series of anti-Jewish decrees. Jews were required to wear a yellow star. Jews were required to turn in their bicycles. Jews were forbidden to use streetcars. Jews were forbidden to ride in cars, even their own. Jews were required to do their shopping between 3 and 5 p.m. Jews were required to frequent only Jewish-owned barber shops and beauty parlors. Jews were forbidden to be out on the streets between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. Jews were forbidden to go to theaters, movies, or any other forms of entertainment. Jews were forbidden to use swimming pools, tennis courts, hockey fields, or any other athletic fields. Jews were forbidden to go rowing. Jews were forbidden to take part in any athletic activity in public. Jews were forbidden to sit in their gardens or those of their friends after 8 p.m. Jews were forbidden to visit Christians in their homes. Jews were required to attend Jewish schools, etc., etc." In this oppressive, violent atmosphere, Otto Frank thought it best to secret his family away. He had tried to get them out of the country, first to the United States and then to Switzerland, and it just didn't work. So They go into hiding. They seclude themselves in the upper story of a house that at the bottom story housed Otto Frank's business. The people who still worked in the business would care for the Franks for the next 2 years, bringing them supplies and bringing them news of the outside world. You can only imagine how terrific this experience must have been for a 13-year-old girl, a girl who was barely 13. On her 13th birthday, her father Otto gave her the striped journal that would become the basis of the book that the entire world knows. And she began writing in it almost immediately to describe the atmosphere that was filling her with anxiety and tension. After they go into seclusion, she writes, "I'm terrified our hiding place will be discovered and that we'll be shot." Can you imagine a 13-year-old child writing something like this, fearing for her life in this particular way? Or she writes in a different place, "We are at the mercy of the cruelest monsters to stalk the earth, and only because we are Jews." Or she writes in still another place, after she hears news about what's happening outside, "Terrible things are happening. At any time of night and day, poor helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. They're allowed to take only a knapsack and a little cash with them, and even then they're robbed of these possessions on the way. Families are torn apart. Men, women, and children are separated. Children come home from school to find that their parents have disappeared. Women return from shopping to find their houses sealed, their families gone." This kind of fear that she's experiencing, this kind of tension, is only understandable, of course. But what makes it unique for Anne is that there's no outlet for it other than speaking in her diary. The adults who are hiding with her in the attic of this Amsterdam building consider her to be mischievous to the point of irritation. She's constantly squabbling with one or another of them. The relationship between her and her mother and her sister Margot is especially toxic. She just has no way of exorcising the fear that she's experiencing. And so it builds and it builds and it builds within her. And the more frightened she becomes, quite frankly, probably the more annoying she becomes to the people around her, who likewise are trying to cope with the anxiety that this horrible situation has imposed upon them. Nor does Anne have the consolation of religion. She tells us at one point early on in the exile upstairs that her mother, who seems to have been relatively pious, tried to get Anne to read from her prayer book. Anne says that she thought that the German prayers were rather beautiful, but that she was left unmoved by them. In fact, she was kind of bored by them. She has no outlet for her anxiety amongst the people with whom she's living, and she has no outlet with God for that same kind of anxiety. As the months progress, however, a change begins to occur in Anne. About a year and a half in, she begins to write increasingly about God. Oh, not in pious, trickly ways, but in ways that suggest that she is beginning to discover something greater than the hidden place that she's in and something greater than her own anxieties. She will frequently talk about nature and God in the same sentence, and she will write over and over again how much solace she takes in contemplating nature, a nature that is calm and peaceful and which she feels assured is somehow revelatory of God. What that God is, she never goes into detail, but she's convinced that there is something above her, transcendent of the horrible situation she's in, that will eventually, even if she doesn't live to see it, set things right. In April of 1944, there's a burglary in the warehouse, and people are pounding on the door that leads to the secret attic. And she and the other people who are with her are absolutely terrified that they have finally been discovered. And during that period, something remarkable happens to Anne. Let me read you her account of it. After the crisis is over and they have not been discovered, she writes this. We've been strongly reminded of the fact that we are Jews in chains, chained to one spot without any rights, but with 1,000 obligations. We must put our feelings aside. We must be brave and strong, bear discomfort without complaint, do whatever is in our power, and trust in God. One day this terrible war will be over. The time will come when we'll be people again, and not just Jews. She's no longer complaining. She now believes that she must be courageous, that she must put her trust in something greater than herself. She goes on. Who has inflicted this on us? Who has set us apart from all the rest? Who has put us through such suffering? It's God who's made us the way we are, but it's also God who will lift us up again. In the eyes of the world, we're doomed. But if, after all this suffering, there are still Jews left, the Jewish people will be held up as an example. Who knows, maybe our religion will teach the world and all the people in it about goodness, and that's the reason, the only reason, we have to suffer. We can never be just Dutch or just English or whatever. We'll always be Jews as well, and we'll have to keep on being Jews. But then we'll want to be. So now she sees that the Jewish people have a mission. It's to shine forth as beacons of hope and courage and trust in the midst of chaos, in the midst of wilderness, in the midst of unspeakable, horrific cruelty. And she considers herself to be part and parcel of that beacon. She now has a mission to be a member of the Jewish people who are suffering, and in their suffering, setting an example to and for the world. Shortly before they are discovered, the Frank family and their 4 companions in the secret annex, discovered on the 4th of August, 1944, Anne writes what is probably the most famous single passage in her entire diary. And I believe that this passage indicates to us just how far she has become in her spiritual journey. It's hard for us young people, she writes, to hold on to our opinions at a time when ideals are being shattered and destroyed, when the worst side of human nature predominates, when everyone has come to doubt truth, justice, and God. How can young people who once were so full of ideals, and properly so, hold on to them when the world seems to be falling apart? It's difficult in times like these, she goes on. Ideals, dreams, and crushed hopes rise within us, only to be crushed by grim reality. It's a wonder I haven't abandoned all my ideals. They seem so absurd and impractical. Yet, I cling to them because I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart. Ideals in the situation in which Anne finds herself may seem absurd and impractical, but there is something within her that clings to at least one ideal, that beneath the surface, people are basically good, and that what is going on now, what she describes as chaos and suffering and death, is ephemeral, is transitory, will pass. She goes on in the same diary entry to suggest that she may not herself live to see the end of the chaos and the death and the suffering, but she is confident that it will come to an end. As she writes, "Yet when I look up at the sky, I somehow feel that everything will change for the better, that this cruelty too will end, that peace and tranquility will return once more. In the meantime, I hold on to my ideals." Now, in point of fact, Anne Frank, as you know, did not survive the war. She and her family were arrested, as I said a minute ago, on the 4th of August, 1944. Immediately, they were sent to the horrible detention camp of Westerbork. It was a camp in Holland from which people would be shipped to the death camps, particularly Auschwitz. And that's exactly what happened to Anna and her family. We do not know exactly when she died. We suspect that she and her sister Margot died within days of one another, either in February or March of 1945. They were both in Bergen-Belsen, which was the female side of the Auschwitz camp. 5 years after her death, her father Otto publishes the diary, which he was given after he returned from the death camps. He was the only one of the family to survive. And the rest is history. The world has come to know this child, Anne Frank, who has inspired literally millions of people. My friends, you and I live in troubled times. People now are being deported. People now are being swept up from the streets. We now live in a society which is becoming increasingly authoritarian. And so we may be asking ourselves, where do I fit in to what's going on? How does it affect my spiritual development and my own spiritual journey? I think that Anne Frank offers us encouragement and hope, because in her spiritual journey, we see someone who moves from fear and tension and bitterness and animosity to an individual who now believes toward the end of her life that she is part of something greater, that something greater is not only God, but is a humane mission to show the world that even in the midst of death and chaos and suffering, goodness abides. It's a precious, precious message, and it's one that I hope that you and I can increasingly take to heart. My friends, if you have not yet had a chance to read The Diary of Anne Frank, I have only just begun to touch on its manifold richness. So let me please encourage you to pick up a copy, to read it prayerfully and gratefully. I'm Father Carey. This has been another Holy Spirit moment. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.